Welcome to a Men in Blazers pod special. Our guest today is Hollywood's equivalent of a five-tool player. He's a producer, composer, screenwriter, and he's even mastered the ancient art of the novel. His adaptation of Fargo for FX has earned him an Emmy for Best Miniseries, and if you've not seen it, you can binge watch all 10 episodes of the second series, June 4th, beginning 10 a.m. on FX. If all this wasn't enough, this man's new book, Before the Fall, already hailed by the New York Times as one of the suspense novels of the year, is out this week. So we welcome to this pod, joining us right here in the crap part of Soho, the one, the only, an American hero, Mr. Noah Hawley.
Right on.
Oh, Noah, I'm thrilled to have you here.
It's so good to be here.
First, I've got to say, as a leading member of Team Hansi, it is an absolute honour to sit opposite the man who dreamt him up. But also today, you release your fifth book, Before the Fall. So I want to start with the obvious questions, because the obvious questions are the ones that are always grounded in human jealousy. With everything that you have in production right now, how the hell do you have time to write a book, Noah Hawley?
I don't, is the answer. I don't have time to write a book at all. And in fact, this was worse because I had written the first 150 pages or so before Fargo, before the first year of Fargo, put it in a drawer. And then you made the show and then started winning all the awards, and my agent quite smartly took it out of the drawer and sent it out as a partial manuscript. And we had an auction one week for the book and an auction for the movie rights the next week. And then now I had to finish the book while we were making the second season of Fargo and editing it. And it's a blur, basically, is what it is. But there was definitely a Christmas break there, 2 weeks off from the show, which was great, during which I basically just wrote.
You killed this book in the 2 weeks
No, that's a great story, but that's not what happened. I did write about 100 pages.
But when we were chatting before we went on, you talked about that freelance muscle that you've never quite shucked.
I'm starting to
drives you
now.
Onwards.
Yeah, no, it's, when you're hustling and TV, the TV business is a hustling business. You write a pilot, you get the pilot picked up, you make the pilot, then are they going to pick it up to go to series? Then you get the series pick up. Then for like 4 or 5 months, you're making the show, you're the king of the hill, you've got this $60 million corporation you're the CEO of, and you're making 1,000 decisions a day, and then they cancel the show. Like my second show was canceled after, it was 7 days. It went from being the premiere show, the first dollar show of the fall season, to canceled in 8 days. They canceled it the day after the second episode.
You didn't even have time to say, nothing can go wrong now.
Exactly. And then you end up, like Napoleon on the island, and nobody's calling and there's nothing to do. And so to avoid that, you start to try to take on a lot of different things so that you're not on that roller coaster. But then, of course, what happens when you reach a certain level, which I did after Fargo, is everything goes. And then you're like, well, I can't make all this stuff at the same time. But then, of course, you have to, because you were the guy who said yes.
The guy who says yes can never invade Europe by leaving Elba. Just remember from Napoleon's mistakes.
Yes.
Live and learn. I read your book before last week. I've got to say, the second scene, I'm giving nothing away here, because it's also on the back cover, in which the protagonist fights for his life, swimming heroically with a 4-year-old fellow survivor 4 miles to reach the shore after a plane crash, which, perhaps because I read this book on a plane flight, it made me sob. It made me absolutely sob, and I found it impossible to put the book down from there on. Would you be offended if I called this book Rashomon meets the Great American Beach Read?
Let me think about that. No, I would not be offended.
Crap my pants for a minute then.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, my goal is always, and it's the same with the show, is I feel like if you entertain people, they give you permission to do more. And the show Fargo for me it's a second watch show. It's, you watch it the first time to see what happens, and it's unpredictable on some level. And then when you look back, the story seems inevitable. So you want to go back and watch it knowing what happens, and I feel like the audience gives you permission to do more thematically or with character. So, you got to tell a great story, and then within that, you can make these digressions into character and theme.
We'll talk about Fargo in a minute, but this book, this book is you going back to your roots, which were in fiction. You started off as a writer in the legendary San Francisco grotto, writing books, making television now, screenplay writing. They're all so different as discipline. One's a lonely pursuit, the other a massive ensemble business, in which you are, I mean, you said yourself, essentially a creative CEO. To me, they're kind of loosely connected, but very different Olympic disciplines. It's like being good at the 100 meters, the 1500 meters, and the 3000 meter steeplechase. How did you know that you have the inherent ability to win a gold medal in all of them?
You know, my motto is, what else can I get away with? And my feeling is like, they let me, somebody published a book, so I was a novelist, and then what about a movie? Would someone buy a movie from me? And then I sold a screenplay, and I thought, okay, this is great. Now they think I'm a screenwriter also. And then somebody said, what do you think about TV? And I was like, I'm for it. Like, let's see what happens. You know, I feel like on one level, you either have the brain from doing multiple things at once, or you don't. And there are plenty of great artists who only want to do one thing. It's too hard to switch tracks. And, you know, I'm certainly pushing the envelope of multiple projects at this moment. But, you know, I feel like I'm an instinctual storyteller, and we can be sitting in a room talking about Fargo, and I can walk next door to talk about another show called Legion, or you know, as I had at one point, go to a third room and talk about adapting Kurt Vonnegut, Cat's Cradle. And, you know, you sit there and you listen, and your brain gets into that zone, and you think, oh yeah, this is our storytelling approach on this thing. So this is a fun idea. Let's play with this. And but, you know, some days are harder than others.
I mean, you make it seem so easy as you're strolling between rooms.
Strolling, yeah.
But as your plotting process, is it different for books than for television?
Yeah, because I feel like a book is, you know, really informed by the internal states of characters. So you know, it's you're inside the characters' minds and thought processes in a way that you're not. I mean, that work, all you have on a screen is behavior and dialogue, you know, action and dialogue, and you're never going to hear the character's thoughts or that process. So, you know, you hear a lot of book writers talk about how they thought the character was going to do one thing and they ended up doing something else, and then you say, oh, come on, you sound like an asshole, like you wrote the book. But the reality is sometimes, like, you know, you write your way to a character's emotional state, and then you find that they're saying something or doing something, you know, that was not necessarily what you planned on originally.
How do you think about yourself? The way you described your career arc, you make it sound like you did one thing well and people created an opportunity for you and you're like, okay. And it kept on kind of tumbling. So you're a screenwriter
right
now. So you're a showrunner now. That's all externally applied definitions of what you are. How do you describe yourself to yourself?
I just tell stories. And you know, I've moved into directing on the show, and I just directed this Legion pilot. But it's, you know, that's also storytelling, and you know, there is this sense, especially if you're in a visual medium, right? And TV used to be talking heads. It used to be close up, you know, chase sequence, close up, you know. So there was nothing cinematic about it. But, you know, starting with obviously The Sopranos and The Wire and Breaking Bad, TV started to tell the story with the camera more. So, you know, I'm always excited in a script if I can have 4 or 5 pages without dialogue, which is really just building suspense and telling the story that way. And at that point, you know, that you're basically using the script to tell the story with the camera, it's sort of a natural step if you have the inclination to remove the middleman and become the director of that story yourself. So I don't know, but for me, it's just about trying to get to that organic story and truth, and cast the right characters, the right actors, etc.
You make it seem so effortless, like a surfer just gliding on a wave through all of these different disciplines. I sold you short when I said you started off in the grotto trying to be a lit gentleman, because you actually started as a singer-songwriter, right?
Yes.
A funk purveyor, turn lit star, turn TV writer, turn showrunner. I mean, these are completely different cultures to navigate. New York downtown grunge, San Francisco grotto, coffee house culture where the suffering is real, Hollywood lot glamour with its dozens of assistants and air kisses and kind of secret mores that you have to understand. How do you view your own rise, Noah? Are there different distinct Noah Hawley eras, like the Paleolithic, the Neolithic, and the post-Enlightenment Noah Hawley? Or do they all just seem like you're making them sound, and I don't believe one just simple, effortless flow between cultures?
No, the pottery from my rock star days has just appeared. The substrata.
Those cave paintings are amazing.
Yeah. The interesting thing, certainly in the Hollywood dynamic, is that there's a narrative, right? And there's the perception of value, and if you can create that narrative of being a creator, an original voice, and maintain that, then that's the story that people believe about you. And some of it is luck. I started out, as you said, I published a novel, and then I sold a spec screenplay, and then,
To Patrick Stewart.
To Patrick Stewart, yes.
Sorry, Sir Patrick Stewart.
Sir Patrick Stewart, who gave me one of the epic dressing downs of all time on a phone call in a moving vehicle. I had to pull over to the side of the road.
Go on,
you got to tell that story. My first book was A Conspiracy of Tall Men, which was optioned by Paramount, and Sir Patrick had hung a shingle. It was right after he'd played Picard for the first time, I believe, in the movie, etc. And
you earned in the knighthood essentially, but go on.
I did basically, and so then I wrote the spec screenplay, which was called The Alibi. They turned into a Steve Coogan movie called Lies and Alibis, and anyway, but Patrick and his then wife, who had been a post producer on Next Generation, they hung this shingle, and so I didn't really know anybody in town, and I'd written the script, and they read it, and they said, "Oh, we love this, and we'd like to go out with it," and whatever, a period of some months went by, during which time I had acquired an agent in Hollywood and an attorney, and the agent said, all right, well, they've had enough time with it, so we're going to go out with it. And so the agency basically took the script away from them and sent it out, which is a normal process in the town. So I'm driving to meet my now wife for dinner, and phone rings, and it is Sir Patrick on the phone, and he is, I'm not sure what the English approximation for how mad he would be, but
batshit crazy.
Yeah, royally pissed or something, and proceeded to lay into me for the sort of like epitome of Hollywood backstabbing, etc. I'm new to town, like I don't know what I'm doing, and we want the celebrities to like us, right? So anyway, he lays in, and he's a Royal Shakespearean trained actor, and was the captain of the universe, the free universe.
He's all of our dads.
Yeah. So that scene for him to play, and plus, his wife then being the producing partner, and her feelings being heard, it became a very personal thing. So he laid into me, and I'm trying to defend myself and saying, as a new agent and tactics and all that, sort of thing, and he, reamed me for a few minutes, and then he said, welcome to Hollywood, Noah. Good luck with your new tactics. And he hung up the phone. And I showed up at the dinner with my wife, and she's like, what happened to you?
Shaking.
And yeah. But the best part was, of course, that they were still the producers on the book. And once I had sold a screenplay, the Paramount hired me to adapt my book. And so then I had to... Then there was this whole, like, that never happened meeting in the parking lot of of the Fred Siegel, where it was like we hugged it out, etc. So, yeah, it's we all have those stories somewhere.
I've been reamed out. All of us listening, we need to get our lives to a certain place where we get reamed out.
If I could do the voice, it would be a better story, but it was an epic drive.
It's in the game. But I'll say Fargo 2, for me, was one of the most perfectly crafted pieces of television that I've ever seen.
Well, thank you.
I'm so grateful to you for making it. It was set in the winter of 1979. It follows the travails of a Minnesota beautician, Peggy Blomquist, brilliantly played by Kirsten Dunst, and her husband, Butcher Ed, Landry Clark's Jesse Plemons, as they attempt to cover up a hit-and-run accident that involves a member of the Fargo crime family. If you've not seen it, listeners, I don't know what you've been doing with your life, but as I said, the whole series re-airs in a marathon on June the 4th on FX. I've got to ask you though, deciding to riff off a Coen Brothers movie, such a bold move in the first place. They've such a devoted, hardcore subculture. You can either create something agonizingly that gets their approval, but then you can disappear down the Coen Brothers wormhole and alienate the wider American audience. How did you do that dance? No, I want to know what made you want to risk doing that dance to begin with. I mean, to have the human impulse to essentially touch the third rail of a subway.
Well, it was a terrible idea. And then when it worked, it was a worse idea to throw it out and start again. But, I feel like we'd been rewarded for that risk-taking in the first year, and that our best chance of critical success in the second year was to take the same or a greater risk, just in expanding what Fargo could be. I mean, when I first sat down with FX, I said, why is the movie called Fargo, right? It takes place in Minnesota. The first scene, the first 5 minutes takes place in North Dakota, but the rest of it takes place in Minnesota, and it's called Fargo because that word is so evocative of a place, what Joel and Ethan Coen described as Siberia with family restaurants. And it's a place where you can have the Swedish meatballs at the buffet and then freeze to death in the parking lot. But now after the movie, the word Fargo also means this sort of true crime case where truth is stranger than fiction, this fake true story. So if we're not remaking the movie, if there are no characters from the movie in the show, and we're not doing the story of the movie in the show, then how is it an adaptation of the movie except we're taking this word Fargo and we're saying that it creates a mind space for, in which you think, oh, it's a story about a crime where you meet the criminals before the crime is committed, and it involves a basically decent law enforcement officer who's probably in over her head, etc. And so the first year was a more literal, it's like Martin Freeman's character is a kind of paradigm for Bill Macy, and Alison Tolman is kind of Frances McDormand, except not really. And then, Billy Bob's character was not like a character you found in Fargo, but there was a Coen-esque quality, I suppose. And so then the sort of geometric math to say, all right, now it's the second year, can we turn Fargo into an American epic about the death of the family business and the rise of corporate America, and add 100 extra moving parts and characters, and have it, and Bruce Campbell is Ronald Reagan, and there's a UFO.
The open wound of war.
Yeah, and that sense of a country that is, at its lowest point and doesn't realize that, it's morning in America in just a year, for better or worse, that the 70s are about to become the 80s. So, and that was that's a complicated dance to try to take that time period, which is what I wanted to do, and not just have it be a backdrop for a crime story, but to say, can we turn 1979 into a crime story?
But it's a structure. It's also a tone of storytelling. And as a creative bloke, is it frustrating to always write in someone else's voice? Is there a moment after Fargo 1 that you're like, hang on, this was me doing this. This was not Coen brothers. This was Hawley, non-brother. And capturing the Coen tone rather than your tone. I mean, Hawley doing Coen. Do you ever feel like a presidential speechwriter always writing for someone else's voice that's not your own?
Not really, because that didn't feel like what the story was. I mean, it wasn't. I didn't feel like I was hiding behind a curtain and everyone was saying, Joel and Ethan have made this tremendous television show. I think in fact, I found myself much more front and center than I was expecting on some level, which was, it's like how does one, and the reality is that, the show is probably 60 or 70% Coen and 30-40% me, and more so in the second year. There is a tone of voice that's very natural for me in writing the show, and then the book is the book has a different voice to it, certainly, but there's humor in it, and there's a balance of drama in it, and I'm playing with structure in it, and all those elements are there in the work. I just feel like each story that you tell, the structure of it needs to reflect the content of it. So,
as a viewer, I've got to say this: please do a series for FX based on a serious man.
I would love to. I just rewatched that, actually.
Just the dentist scene in The Serious Man. The guy's teeth scene deserves its own sprawling epic treatment.
Well, we had our parable sequence in the first year, and I, as I said to the network, it's not that I want a 10-minute parable sequence, but it's a Coen Brothers movie, so I kind of need one, and that was a crazy, we did the Colin Hanks tells the story of the man who tried to give everything away, including his body, and that was it was a sort of production nightmare because it's a whole sequence that takes like 5 minutes in the episode, but we had to build all these 2-wall sets and create this own world inside of our world, but I find that stuff the most exciting.
I've got to ask you about Hansi Dent.
Yeah.
He's the me I wish I was. A truly sympathetic character who's actually a master of deadly violence.
Yeah.
Who's your favourite character that you built in the Fargo universe?
Oh, that's a hard one, I would say. I mean, Billy's character, Malvo, will always have a special place in my heart because I feel like that's what I brought to Fargo in a way, that character, which said, this isn't just the movie. This isn't just, we're going to have a Marge and we're going to have a Jerry Lundegaard and, they're going to be thinly veiled versions. Malvo he wasn't Anton Chigurh and he wasn't Peter Stormare and he wasn't the lone biker of the apocalypse. He was something new. He was a creature of the wilderness whose only really driving goal was to see could he turn civilized people into animals and how far could he push them. And he would sacrifice everything for that. And he was so fun and he broke so many rules and having him, meeting him after a year as a dentist, like that was the most fun sort of stuff to write, definitely.
Oh, I've just been in Iceland, where the manager of the national team, a fantastic football team, is also a part-time dentist.
Oh, yeah.
The whole time I was interviewing him, I thought Billy Bob Thornton.
Yeah, as Billy would say, aces.
I've got a hard segue to move out of Billy Bob Thornton to this question, but I've got to ask you, what is the secret to writing screenplays surrounded by violence, but to write so well for women's voices? Floyd Gerhardt, Betty Solverson.
Well, I mean, the violence is... For me, the violence should never be entertainment. And I think that so much of violence in our modern stories is entertainment, in the superhero movies, et cetera. It's like it's all about the violence and people talk between, but we want to build up to these epic sequences. And I feel like in Joel and Ethan's movies, the violence is never entertaining. It's always sort of shocking and grotesque. When Peter Stormare shoots that state trooper and the blood arcs out of his head and gets on Buscemi and he says, "Whoa, Daddy!" Like it's because it's been fun up until that moment, and then it's really kind of disturbing, and I think that plays well into the female characters because it's not this macho, black hat versus white hat. There is a tragedy to it, and I like the second year is a great example because there were so many moving parts, and you would think Jesse Plemons, Ed Blomquist, he's our hero, and so no matter who comes to kill him, we're rooting for him. And then I send a kid with cerebral palsy, to shoot him, and now who are you rooting for? Do you know what I mean? And so it goes from being something that's very obvious to something that for the audience is a little bit uncomfortable and requires them to kind of look at their own enthusiasm for that violence.
Oh, you would have been a very good games master in the Hunger Games.
Exactly.
You would have been the greatest.
Yeah. Well, the biggest twists always have to be moral, I think.
Details leaking out about Fargo Season 3, which debuts in 2017. It's a World Cup off year, thank God. Ewan McGregor.
Ewan,
one
yes.
of our finest.
Yes.
Will play not one, but two characters.
I know.
Emmett and Ray Stussy.
Yeah.
At the center of the story. One you will know as the parking lot king of Minnesota.
There can be only one.
The other is a pot-bellied parole officer with his best days behind him. I want to talk about the mental pressure of putting Season 3 together, putting Season 2 together. I mean, you have a show that's become revered.
Yeah.
And then you've got to come back and give us more.
Yeah.
How do you keep up in the ante without destroying the inner values which made it popular in the first place? It demands both, I imagine, creativity and a rigor.
Yeah, you're really stressing me out right now. It's
Yeah, that idea of placing a statue of yourself on the writer's room table at the first meeting was probably not a good one.
No. You just have to focus on the creative work. You have to say, well, this story is its own story, and how do we tell the best version of this story? And I can't control the way that people respond to the story. I couldn't have told you going into the release of our second year that critics were going to review it even more highly than they reviewed the first year. I just made the best show that I could make. And here, again, it's a very different story. It's not an epic on the same level. It is a more personal, more intimate story, but it's also not the first year. It's its own animal. And on some level, I won't be able to tell you until we've written it and I'm halfway through making it what it really wants to be, because there is a discovery process to it. I didn't find my way to the split screens that we used in the second year until we were cutting the first 2 episodes together. And I just try to stay open to what the story wants to be. And, the cliche is that a story gets written 3 times. You write the script, and then you write it again when you film it, and then you write it again in the editing room. And I believe that to be true. I find the editing room to be a very exciting place to sort of tell the story. And then when you've got a lot of moving pieces the way that I do, the show becomes modular. You can sort of say, well, on paper, these scenes wanted to go in this particular order, but now on screen, you want to move these things around, and maybe you want to cut these scenes together so that you're intercutting between 2 things. Like, it's a very exciting way to tell a story.
Where do you get those details? Talk about the split screen, the Jabberwocky speech.
Yeah.
In the book, Exercise Pioneer, Jack LaLanne, which I savoured more than any detail, a cameo role, which is just so fantastically detailed. Where do they come from in the process? Are they late in? Are they early in? Do you have them before you start? It's fantastic.
No, I had Jack LaLanne early in the process, and I couldn't tell you why on some level, other than that there's a specificity to it. They always try to tell you in Hollywood that to make something for the biggest audience, you need to make something as general as possible. But I find the opposite to be true. The more specific you make something, the more crazy the character's mother is, the more people come up to you and go, "That's my mom," So it's, I find that specificity is really important. And those details, they just sort of find their way in. I talked about Billy Bob was the dentist and saying aces, and that was just, when I sat down to write that scene, that's what he said, and then that became, or okay then in the second year. I wrote that sequence originally when the car hit Rye Gerhardt on the road. We stayed with it, and Peggy got out of the car in the script, and we saw her, we met her, and we drove home with her. And then in the editing room, I realized, well, it'd be interesting if the car hit him and then just drove away, and we didn't know who drove the car. So then I wrote this scene for Jesse leaving work, and we met him first, and he comes out of the back, and he says, "Okay then," and the butcher says, "Okay then," and Noreen says, "Okay then," and then that became a kind of runner for the show, and the network said, "We feel like we could learn more about Jesse in this moment, maybe in his character." And I was like, "No, I don't think you want to. I think that moment is going to tell you so much about it, the simplicity of it, and so that's where I push back to go, no. I know the instinct is to overwrite it, but imagine it with the actors and imagine it, on camera, and you don't want it to be any more complicated than that."
Do you have fear? Do you live with fear? Do you look at True Detective season 2 and think, "There, but for the grace of God, go I"?
No, I don't have a lot of fear. I don't feel like on that level. I don't know what to say about True Detective season 2 personally, but for me, it's about being true to the world that you've created and the characters you've created, and the fear gets in the way. The fun of a serious man, of making a serious man, which is, I saw Joel and Ethan on this visit to New York, and I asked them, because I just rewatched it, and they said, "Yeah, that one was, we wrote Burn after reading, and, I think it was Focus, Universal Focus," and he said, "Well, we'll make this one if you let us make this other one right after, but we don't want to talk about it, we're just going to make it, and so it was one of those sort of one for you, one for us kind of things, and so... But you look at A Serious Man, which is it's a coming of age story on some level. It's a Torah parable. It's so many different things, and it's so sublime, and it works so well. And none of it, the Goy's Teeth parable, like none of it is something that you would ever teach a class to do. A writing class. You'd never say, "Okay, so you want to start with a guy, and he's a physics professor in Minnesota in 1960, and his wife is leaving him for Cy Abelman." and you know, and Sayu's huggy and brings him a nice Cabernet, and you got to let it breathe, and you know, the whole thing was just such a great movie.
God.
That you like, how did they sit down and write that? It seems so, it must have come out of their heads fully formed.
I go to a lot of movies, and I always wonder what makes people talk all the way through or just laugh ridiculously loudly. It's so annoying. But when I went, that's the only movie I've ever seen where I was that guy.
Yeah.
Belly laughed all the way through the movie.
No, it's genius.
And annoyed the whole
It's genius.
theatre. You got Fargo 3 going down. You're working on Legion.
Yes.
An X-Men tie-in series for FX.
Correct.
You got the screenplay adaptation of your book,
Yeah.
which is doing unbelievably well out the gate before the fall. You got book writing. You're a husband. You're a father of 2.
Yeah.
You've got to enlighten us. What is the secret to productivity?
You know, you can't take it personally. You do personal work. You try to tell personal stories, but you can't take the reaction to that. You know, when you get a note, etc., they cancel a show, etc. You know, it's not you. They're not canceling you. They're not mad at you. They just, you know, and I'm a big believer in, you know, a lot of what I do is managing up, and it's managing creative expectations, and it's, you know, network executives, studio executives, publishers, like, they want to believe. They want to follow you over that hill, you know, and you say, come on, we're going over that hill. We're going to take the city. It's going to be great. They want to go. You just have to get them there. And a lot of the times the notes that you get are fear-driven, or they're about clarity, or, you know, they just don't understand something, or it's about something that's not what they think it is. You know, it's like you didn't set up something properly earlier, and so they feel like this moment is a problem, but actually this moment is fine. It's, you know, so a lot of it is that time management that I have to spend as well, which is like you do the work, and then you have to talk about the work and make them okay with making the work, etc. So I don't know, productivity, you know, I wake up in the morning, I'm like, what am I doing today? And then, you know, some days it's a writing day, and some days it's an editing day, and some days it's a business day, and you know, you just try to, you know, you got to be a good first draft writer. I mean, what I always say is you got to be good enough to get in the room, you got to be good in the room, and you got to deliver when you leave the room. Those are the 3 things that you have to be able to do, and then you know, they'll write you checks.
You're going to take them over that hill.
You got to go.
Going to tell them you're going to.
We got to go.
You're going to take that city. My problem in life, I realized talking to you, is I've always favoured laying siege for years.
No. It's
big mistake.
It's the Mutt speech from Stripes. That's what you got to give them. You know, it's like what is it? We're 4-1 or whatever. Yeah.
Go on, you touched upon productivity and time management. What is your email habit? I was speaking with a productivity guru at the weekend.
Yeah.
And he told me that if I only looked at my email for 5 minutes 3 times a day, I could clear up a full half day a week.
That is probably true. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I try. The good thing, you know, I live in Austin, Texas, which is 2 hours. You get up 2 hours earlier than LA. So it's not until noon, really, that LA is going. So I can have a whole morning writing, working, etc. before they're even waking up there. And then by the time somebody actually calls you on the phone, it's more like 1 or 2 in the afternoon. So that helps. But then, of course, what happens is you're putting the kids to bed, and they still think that you should be taking notes, calls, and stuff. So, you know, sometimes you have to do that. But
You're such a sacrificer. You're also a polymath, a man of many projects, many media, many styles. If I could go all Medici family and underwrite any cultural project of any size that you, Noah Hawley, have always dreamed of making, what would it be?
oh, what's the dream project to make?
Yeah, what are we making?
I don't know. I think we should make Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy the way it should really be made. You know, the original radio play told over all those hours. You know, as brilliantly executed as that story was, because that was a hugely inspirational story for me.
Nothing can hold us back now. Last question. We've got a lot of young listeners to this show. Many admire your rise, your career arc, your accomplishments. I mean, you'd be shocked how many people own your funk album CDs. What was your funk
I would be surprised.
What was it called?
What was it called? I can't even know. The band was Bass Nation. That was the name of the band, but I don't even know that you could find it anymore.
It's like I had Ricky Gervais's album with Shona dancing when he was trying to be a pop star. I still own that with him on the cover. But what would you tell our listeners is the secret to success, Noah Hawley?
my feeling legitimately is if you get to do what you love for a living, you got to love doing it. And so for me, if it's not fun, I'm doing it wrong, and as I said, what else can I get away with? So, whenever we're up there in Calgary making the show or anywhere I am, it's us against the world, and I think that sense of we're all in it together, that it's a collaborative art is really contagious, and people want to be part of something that they, there's the jobs you do for love and the jobs you do for money, and I never wanted the work that I do to be for money. I always wanted it to be for love, and I want the people who work for me to be doing it because they love the work and not just as a money gig. So, that's my hope, is to create an environment for everybody where everyone feels like they're doing their best work, and then we get to go home to our kids.
Keep taking Hollywood over the hill.
Okay.
Keep taking those
We're
cities. We are going. Before the fall, it's out now in all outlets that still sell books. And again, if you've not seen Fargo 2, ask yourself, why have I not yet seen Fargo 2? And good news, FX airing a marathon, the kind of marathon that even I could run, of the second instalment, June the 4th, from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. It's just a flying saucer.